All right, here we go. So the Torah reading for this Shabbat, the last Shabbat of the year, is the short Torah reading Nitzavim, which begins on page 1165. 1165 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, in the Torah, in the Bible. It's Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 9. And it's a very short Torah reading. It's the next to shortest Torah reading. Next time we read Torah for Shabbat, which is next Shabbat, we'll read the next Torah portion, Vayelech, which is the shortest Torah reading on its own. More times than not, Nitzavim and Vayelech are combined to be read on one Shabbat. So and when the Nitzavim is always read before Rosh Hashanah. So Vayelech is sometimes coupled with Nitzavim and also read before Rosh Hashanah, and sometimes it's just Nitzavim. So that's our Torah reading for this Shabbat. And the word Nitzavim means to stand tall, to stand upright. And Moses is saying, you are all standing here today before the eternal, your almighty God. You're all standing in order to enter into a covenant. So the Brit, and of course the word Brit has been an important word in the Torah again and again. And here Moses reiterates that this is what we are supposed to be doing right before he's about to die. And he again talks about all the good things that God has done for us, and that we need to be grateful for that and recognize that God has been beneficent. And then he warns us again, but if you are not persuaded, if you're not into this, watch out. And if you as a people are not going to be into this, then we will suffer great calamities. There are some important verses that stand on their own as messages. For instance, verse 28, the last verse in chapter 29, which says, concealed, that which is, those things concealed are to the eternal, our almighty God. And those things that are revealed are for us and for our children forever, to do all of the words of this Torah. So what that means is something that people have been looking at for a long, long time. It has special markings in the Torah to sort of highlight that that's a significant proposition. And then chapter 30 begins, and we have what's called Parashat HaTshuvah, the chapter on Tshuvah, returning, repentance. And in that chapter, it's not the whole chapter, but in that section, we have the variations on the word to return 7 times. And again and again, both we are supposed to return and God is supposed to return to us. So that's a very appropriate text to lead us into Rosh Hashanah. And as I said, that's actually always read right before Rosh Hashanah. And then we have the idea that, look, we have a choice between life, goodness on the one side, and death and evil on the other. What are we going to choose? And that's basically the idea of the Torah portion. So it's very, like I said, very short, and it's a beautiful rhetorical performance. It's very eloquent, and it's if we pay attention to it, it's in my opinion a very, very moving Torah portion. So does anybody have a particular focus that they want to draw us to? I think that we even have a good chance that we could actually read through this Torah portion. So why don't we start from the top and see what happens? So we're on 1165 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 9. Anybody want to volunteer to read? Going once.
I'll read if no one else will.
All right. Is anybody else going to save us from
Anyone else
having
want?
Sarita read? All right. It's got to be Sarita then. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. You stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God, your tribal heads, your elders and your officials, all the men of Israel, your children, your wives, even the stranger within your camp, from woodchopper to water drawer, to enter into the covenant of the Lord your God, which the Lord your God is concluding with you this day with its sanctions, to the end that he may establish you this day as his people and be your God, as he promised you and as he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I make this covenant with its sanctions, not with you alone, but both with those who are standing here with us today, this day before the Lord our God, and with those who are not with us here this day.
Okay, let's stop here. Those are 2 aliyot already. Out of the 7 aliyot, those are the two first aliyot. So comments, reactions. So as I said, this is a reiteration. If you look in your Eitz Chaim edition, this is called the covenant ceremony, right? So this is an affirmation in explicit terms. You are standing here today, says Moses, in order to enter into a covenant with God. Now, we have entered into a covenant with God a bunch of times already. We entered into a covenant with God, most especially at Mount Sinai. So we were told then that was, oh, look at that. So what's the name? I forgot.
This is Zuko and the other one is May.
All right. And I'll never remember those names anyway, but nice
Well,
to see you there for a second.
He has been to so many of your classes.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So Moses says, you're standing to enter into a covenant. Why did we have to stand? Why did the people have to stand at this moment to enter into a covenant with God when the covenant has already been established?
Well, I think it's suggesting that from time to time, one has to reaffirm a covenant. So they are ready to go into the land of Israel. And, you know, if you're really ready, you know, we're doing this with God, right? This is the fulfilling the destiny with God. And so reaffirming that, in fact, we believe in this covenant. I mean, I think it's reestablishing it at a critical time.
Okay, yes. So this is like this very important turning point. The whole reality of the Jewish people is changing in 2 basic ways. First of all, they're going into the land. And second of all, without Moses.
Right.
So these are 2 big changes. And so therefore, Moses says, you have to take it upon yourselves, right? That this is a pact, right? A covenant means something that is a bond between 2 parties, that you will be entering into this with God. And who's included in this pact?
Everyone.
Right. So the first part of it says everyone, right? So from your elite power brokers and leaders, and then your children, even your wives,
Right.
and the English says even the stranger. In the Hebrew, it doesn't say even the stranger. It says and the stranger.
Does the Hebrew say even your wife?
No.
Okay.
So it says your children, your wives, and the stranger, right? It says tapchem, your children, nishechem, your wives, or your women folk, and then gercha, and your stranger, right? And then this last phrase, which I've written about a number of times, I wrote about it again this week. Mechotei veitzecha ad shoev mimecha. From the person who chops your wood to the person who draws your water, right? So that's this, panoramic view of all the people. We can picture them all standing there, from the VIPs to the essential workers who always get ignored and forgotten about. Okay, so that's the first part. But then that's at the beginning of this text. At the end, Moses again says who is included. What does Moses say at the end of the part that we read?
People who are,
Look at 13 and 14 again.
yeah. So I make this covenant with its sanctions, not with you alone, but both with those who are standing here with us this day before the Lord our God, and with those who are not with us here this day.
So it doesn't matter if you're here or not, you're part of this. You're included. How does that work? How does that work? Why is anybody, and who is not included? I mean, who's not there? Who are the people that are not there? I mean, again, remember, this is the desert generation.
Right.
They're all there, right? So who's not there?
Their children.
Their parents, the ones who were at Mount Sinai, are
We
not
got
there.
two contradictory answers here. Interesting, right? Both answers are something to think about. So Geraldine, you go first.
I
What does that
think
mean?
the future generations.
So the future generation, those who are not yet alive, those who haven't arrived in this world yet, right? They are bound by this covenant. Okay, that's one way to read it. And
But the
so we don't-
link is also that it's our job to teach our children.
okay, so you're answering a kind of a question. How could the children be included in the covenant if they're not there? And you are here, and you're going to have to take responsibility to pass this covenant on.
Yep.
Right? That they to make them know that they're included.
And that's in the Shema.
That's in the Shema, right? Teach your children diligently. Right. Okay. So and Sarita said went the opposite direction. So what's your thought?
So looking backward, the whole generation who were at Mount Sinai, they died out. So they're no longer here. And that's, I think, another reason to have a reaffirmation is because
Hearing
this
a lot of static.
generation-
Why am I hearing such static?
I think there's someone on a phone.
Who's on the phone?
Yep, they just muted.
Muted. Well, anyway, whoever you are, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
So the people there, they wandered, and of course they died out. But this generation has not sort of freely of their own will entered into a covenant with God, right? They inherited it. So so for them to affirm it is important because their parents, grandparents are no longer around.
So they're the children in a sense, like Geraldine was talking about, except they're already here, and it's the previous generation that's no longer here,
Right.
right? So those are the ones that aren't here anymore, and now this generation has to do it. But you were mentioning before that means that every generation really would need to renew the covenant, right? Hold on a second. Hello, I'm teaching a class right. So, is that really what happens? Is that really what happens? Do we have a reaffirmation of the covenant day every generation or so in order to keep this going? In a certain sense, what Moses is saying is, this is it. You're going to do this, and this is going to then take effect forever. And what you are going to be doing now will apply to everyone, whoever will come forward in the future, whether they like it or not. It's not that they will have to reaffirm it. Now, realistically speaking, somebody says the heck with it, and we keep on going in the rest of the Torah reading, we'll see. But that's a pretty strong claim, right? We take Geraldine's idea, the children. So I teach the children. What if the children don't want to go along with it? Can they say, thanks very much, I appreciate it, I'm not interested?
Kids do.
What?
Kids do.
It's fine.
Kids do. The answer, according to the way I'm reading this, is no, they can't. They may not obey, they may not take it to heart, they may decide that they don't want to abide by this, but the covenant exists. Moses is saying the covenant is not contingent. The covenant is not, well, if your children decide to follow it, then the covenant will be binding on them. But if they don't decide, it won't be binding on them. A covenant is a binding agreement. Covenant is a binding acceptance of responsibility for two sides. And what Moses seems to be saying is, this is it. What you're going to do now will be binding, even for those who are not here. And that's not obvious. And just because I'm saying it very emphatically doesn't mean that, okay, now everybody's convinced that that's the way it works. I mean, it's not clear. Why is that, or how is that should be the case? Anybody want to react to that? Yes, Sandra.
First of
Rabbi?
all, how do you enforce the covenant? Because I understand what a covenant is, and I'm thinking here we are on the Erev, the holidays, and what happened to you? Oh, isn't going to the holidays like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and all of the whole fall thing a reaffirmation of one's covenantal relationship with God, if you will?
So-
I think, if I may, can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, and I recognize that voice anywhere.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, David, what's up?
I think that especially at Passover time, and maybe the question is answered if we were to look at Rosh Hashanah Omer. I don't remember how it ends. I'm not.
Translate for everybody,
not
they know what you're talking about.
What does the evil son or bad son? What does he say? Where he seemingly is rejecting what are all these laws, these things that you do, meaning to say you and not him. And I'm not in a place where I could sit and flip through pages. I just don't remember how it resolves in the
Right. So
Haggadah.
that's a good citation. We get angry at the wicked son for excluding himself from the group, from taunting everybody and saying, what everything you're doing is a bunch of hooey, and what do you think you're doing? What's wrong with you? And we say to this wicked son, I'm doing this because God took me out of Egypt. And then there's an editorial comment. The editorial comment is, had the wicked son been in Egypt when this drama of redemption actually took place, he wouldn't have been redeemed. So what's playing out over there is there are certain moments where choice actually is very significant. If you didn't want to leave Egypt, then you wouldn't have been redeemed. You would have been stuck in Egypt, and that you wouldn't have joined the group that went out and that became the Jewish people. But also significantly, what the Haggadah says is, then you say, and the Haggadah says it later as well, you say, this happened to me, which of course is factually incorrect. It didn't happen to any of us. It happened thousands of years ago. But we say, no, it happened to me. And in every generation, every single person is meant to see themselves as if they left Egypt. So that's that kind of affirmation that Sandra was saying, that we take it into ourselves imaginatively, emotionally, even morally, and we say, this is mine. And we need to do that in order to make it real. But there is an obligation, or like I said, there is a binding quality to the covenant, which makes the opting out later an act of wickedness. Right? When the wicked child says, I'm out of here, I don't care what you're doing, it's too late. There is an obligation sitting upon the head of that person to step up, to stand as once upon a time their ancestors did, to stand up and to take this on themselves. So the claim here is there's no guarantee that anybody will agree. There's no guarantee that somebody will follow. The whole Torah is full of the Jewish people not following what God wanted them to do. So God can't make anybody actually do this. But on the other hand, God claims that there is an obligation. Just like if somebody, and to use a kind of a drastic idea, there's an obligation on the part of every human being to do good and not to hurt other people. And if you decide I'm out of here, I don't want to abide by those social conventions, right? The Nietzschean Superman idea, Leopold and Loeb. We're higher than conventional morality. We don't. The choice is not yours. You can't opt out of this. You may not do it. You may not follow through, but that will be a betrayal. It will not be. It's not a neutral thing. It's not. If you want to, you can join Shomrei. If you don't want to, you don't join Shomrei. That's fine. There's no obligation to do that. But if you're part of the Jewish people, then you are obligated to live up to the covenant, whether you like it or not. Jen.
How do we feel when, someone really doesn't identify with their Jewish heritage, maybe even joins a different religious group and actually does really amazing and wonderful good things and seems to actually really belong there? Like, I feel like I did that in reverse. Well, not necessarily did wonderful things, but at least, in reverse.
You've done some nice things. You've done some good things.
Right. So I feel like it's a very hard passage in that sense. I do like to think, and I talked about this way back when I had my mikvah and, was official, about this being very meaningful, the idea of this moment in time that's all times and all Jews are there at Sinai. But a lot of my ancestors did opt out. And, for whatever reason they wanted to. And it was meaningful to some, even not practicing, like my grandfather. It mattered to him that when he found out he was Jewish, but completely not meaningful to other of my relatives. So I feel like this is a really hard charge to lay on people for whom also do good things outside of, the outside of Judaism, and maybe even in a different group.
Right. So, okay. And I think an important point. Anybody want to chime in on this? All right. So we'll just keep quiet now for the rest of the session and let it all just sink in. I think what you're saying is, very, very important to pay attention to. I think that historically this has been the case again and again and again. The perspective that is being articulated, as I see it in this text, is a perspective that says that's what this covenant is. It's different. It's different than what's going on with other groups. Other groups may or may not enter into a covenant with God. That's up to them and God. Group loyalty can be meaningful to people or not meaningful to people. Nostalgia, tradition, folkways, memories, all of those things are powerful. They can be meaningful to people. They're not identical with Brit. They're not identical with covenant. They enhance the covenant. They give the covenant more, more meat to it, more juice. But they aren't the covenant itself. The covenant itself is something that happened, that was established thousands of years ago by this ragtag bunch of people who experienced an encounter with God where it wasn't simply a spiritual wow moment. Oh, wow, we met God. That was so amazing. That was so fulfilling. That was so awe-inspiring. That was so whatever. But it was actually a different kind of encounter. It was an encounter that created obligation, that created a commitment on both sides. And that's where it goes, what the claim again. The claim is, and this is a choice that has been made not just by people. It's a covenant. That means it's going both ways. So God is choosing this people. Does that mean you can't be a good person if you're not part of the covenant? Of course not. The Torah gives us numerous examples of people who are good people. Later on in the rest of the Hebrew Bible, we have many examples of people who are good people. We have examples of Jewish people who are disgusting. So there's no guarantee that because you're part of the covenant, that therefore you're wonderful. Not at all. It means simply that you're in this binding relationship. That is a kind of a claim that says, why do we need this this brit to function in the world? Because that's what happened. On a pale reflection kind of level, when two people decide that they want to be with each other, be committed to each other, it doesn't reflect any way on anybody else not being committed to them. It doesn't reflect on them not being committed to anybody else that they're not committed to. But it does reflect on the relationship, this relationship that they establish, that they choose to have between the two of them, then creates obligations. It creates demands. By definition, if this is what you want, or if this is what you have already committed to, then you can't just walk away from it. What's being claimed here is that this is not an individual choice only, but this is a choice of a group. And that then for any individual in that group who walks away from it is walking away from a commitment. Now, your question, Jen, does that mean that that person is incapable of doing all kinds of good things? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But in terms of this issue, it's a walking away. It's an abandoning of a commitment.
I feel like I did that with my confirmation vows. Like,
so
right.
So Christianity, again, with all of the caveats of, making big, gigantic general statements, and watching out to that, how valid or not valid they can be. But there is a basic kind of divergence between Christian, cultures and this traditional Jewish idea, because Christian culture is about individual choice. Christian cultures are about each person affirming their belief and accepting upon themselves being part of the church, being part of the body of the church, the body of Jesus, whatever, the different kinds of symbols and images and theological propositions, but it is about choice, as I understand it. And that's what Moses is taking away here. Moses is saying, this is about a people who now enter this covenant or don't. And once you enter, that's it, right? You're in. And then the expectation is that you're going to live by this covenant. And it doesn't apply to me if I want to or not. It applies to everyone in this group. Now,
which is why it extend, like you have grandparents or great grandparents who don't practice anymore, or some guy who goes and becomes a Vaishnava Hindu or something, and then if he has it, well, let's say she, because then if she has children, her children are still Jewish regardless of what other religion she's
so that's, I think, again, this is historically grappled with, and there were all kinds of phenomena of people joining or leaving the community, but the whole idea that once a Jew, always a Jew, right? That your identity as a Jew is something that you can't slough off, comes from this, right? But then the paradox is, then how can anybody ever join? If it's not about discretion, if it's not about choice, then how could anybody who's not in already come in?
where you get adopted or magically become a child of Abraham and Sarah.
Right. So this is stuff that we've talked about once or twice. That I try to advocate that mikveh ceremony, that ceremony of immersing in waters of life, right? That's what it's about. Not just a swimming pool with the chlorine and stuff, but it's supposed to be some naturally connected body of water. That's a birth process. That's being born into the people. So the wisdom of the tradition of saying it's possible to be born into this at any time if you understand what it means to be born into this and you're willing to take it on. And back to Geraldine's point, this applies to parents too and children. A parent can induct their child into the peoplehood of the Jews, even though the child is a baby, right? If their mother is not Jewish, so they're not, theoretically, they're not Jewish. So do we wait until the kid is bar mitzvah to decide whether they want to be Jews? Well, we do recognize that in the end, it's going to be up to them to do that or not. But when they're a baby, the Jewish parent can say, I'm bringing my kid in, but they have to then be reborn, right? But the parent then is going to be doing this, with their, intention, with their commitment. I want to bring this commitment, transfer it, transmit it, and have this other person in. And of course, that brings up the whole, question of, in general, all the kinds of choices that parents make for children. It's not fair. It's not fair that the parents decided to give me a Jewish education or not give me a Jewish education, to give me this name instead of this other name. I hate my name, or something like that. So eventually, if you really feel strongly enough about it, you can legally do something about it. But
if you convert, you get to have a new name. I found that out.
Right. That's right. So there you are. Then you choose that name. Or again, your parents are going to choose that name if they're doing the converting of you. Right?
Oh, in my case, it was like my mom saying, even though I was an adult, you really should think about the names of your grandmothers.
All right. So, beautiful.
That's very interesting. That is beautiful.
Right. So, yeah. So it's definitely complicated. Every story, of course, is a variation, and it's got its own wrinkles to it. But there is this, there is this kind of historic burden that Moses is putting here by saying this goes past this moment. It goes past this generation. It goes into time. And it means, and then eventually it works backwards too, like Sarita was saying. Then a person who has this consciousness feels that they're part of a flow, or needs to understand that they're part of a flow. And that's one of the challenges people that join the community. That's one of the things that they need to work on, right? To be able to feel not simply that this is a momentous moment for me personally. I feel good now. I feel fulfilled. I feel inspired. But to then actually begin to start sending out these virtual routes, backwards and forwards and sideways beyond oneself, is is one of the tasks of each person, and that's what Moses is saying here. It's a unique kind of what can I say, human and political reality, right? It occurs within groups. Somebody was saying something.
I just wanted to ask, with all of that weight, I mean, at the end of the day, if we have a daughter who really wants to be a Vaishnava, that's where she's going to find herself. Is it still a mitzvah to support her in that and keep including her in the family, etc.? I mean, is that...
So I think in more modern times, this question is both easier and harder. I think, as we will get to, if we do, maybe we won't, in the Torah, but we've read enough Torah together. The Torah has a pretty dark view of what's going on in the world outside of this family drama about creating a Jewish people, right? They really, the Torah really does not respect idolatry, meaning all of the idolatrous cultures that were around. The Torah doesn't like it, and the Torah actually condemns people all around them morally as being reprobates and so on. The Torah is pretty much disgusted with the surrounding civilizations. So therefore for the Torah is like, anybody that doesn't take this when it's being handed to them on a silver platter, then you're choosing death, right? That's the message that Moses says later. Here it is. Here's the Torah. The Torah is a tree of life. If you don't take the Torah, you're choosing death. It's all then bad, awful. God will be very angry. God has every right to be angry at you, and so on. When we get to our moment in civilization, I think, and so therefore, if you ask the parent then, so what do you say? Your son has decided to go worship Baal. Are you okay with that? The answer is no. I cannot be okay with that. Right? Because for the Torah, that would be the same thing as saying your kid has decided to become a drug dealing serial murderer. Are you okay with that? No. So that's back in those days. It was a very, very stark division. And what I've said many times also, you have to see this document called the Torah as a revolutionary document. We take this stuff for granted. It's already established itself. It's taken root in the world. The Torah is written and given and struggled over and at a time when it is a new idea that almost doesn't have a chance in the world of taking root. So the struggle that the Torah engages in at the time of the Torah is really life and death. It's really about whether this is going to happen. Now that struggle, in the broadest terms, doesn't have that edge anymore. At least we would like to think so. And then every once in a while we get slapped in the face. But the world as we see it today is much more nuanced in the facets of living that we see around us. This started already in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages already, we have the Meiri is the most prominent proponent of this. The Meiri was a rabbi. His name was Meir, and then he was called the Meiri, the one who was enlightening. and he lived in Provence, and he said, look, let's get real. We don't live in a civilization. He lived in a Christian world, and he said, we don't live in a civilization that doesn't believe in goodness, that doesn't believe in treating people decently, that doesn't believe in creating a society that's just. We live in a society where people actually get it. So they may not be part of our religion, but they're okay. So then all of the stuff that's in the Torah about this is an abomination and this is terrible and so on, he says that doesn't apply to the people we know and live among. Now, this was after Crusades. This was after plenty of tragedies and so on. But he was able to see it in a much more complicated way. He paved the way, and it's been going on since then, so that by now we see all around us that there are plenty of choices that people can make that are not going to destroy the world. Now, does that mean that I'm going to be jumping up and down for joy if if my son chooses to leave the fold? No, I will not be overjoyed. But if the choice is a thoughtful choice that seems to be about embracing life, choosing life rather than not, then I think that it's easier now to humbly say, okay, I don't know everything, and I don't have a monopoly on goodness, and I don't have a monopoly on truth, and God bless you. What Moses would say is, never lose hope that they won't find that spark of Jewishness in them and fan it and make it meaningful. There's a whole phenomenon already for over a generation called Jew-boos. Jew-boos are Jewish Buddhists.
Yeah.
Although there's no contradiction, like you don't really have to leave Judaism to be a Jew-boo.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
That's the contention of people who explicitly identify as Jew-boos. What they're saying is this is not a contradiction.
Actually, they'd probably say that about Vaishnavas too, honestly.
Well, that I don't know enough about, but that's an example of somebody who's saying, I'm not betraying my Jewishness, and I'm actually embracing my Jewishness, but I'm also adding to my reservoir of spiritual tools and meanings and so on. So so those possibilities exist today in a whole different way. On the other hand, we have people who have left the Jewish fold for what they claim to be a better way, and again and again, this is not a rule, but this is again and again, they end up becoming thorns in the side of the Jewish people, or not friends of the Jewish people, and that's a terrible tragedy. That means there's something wrong. That means that the kind of rebellion that's happening, it's not about, oh, this glorious other tradition just is so amazing, I want to embrace this. It becomes mixed with some kind of anger or resentment or contempt, and that has happened many times. There was a person, trying to remember what her first name was. Her last name was Stein.
Gertrude.
No,
No.
she became a sister, and nevertheless, so she was seen as a pretty sacred spiritual person, and she was murdered by the Nazis because she was originally Jewish.
Right.
And it was terrible. But on the other hand, she couldn't stand the Jews. So she had no sympathy for what was going on with the Jewish people. So this is, tricky. It's tricky. Yeah. Yeah, Merle.
So what you said 10 minutes ago, that if you don't enter the covenant, you've chosen death. Okay, so is that why some very Orthodox people who are Jews, whose children marry outside of the religion, is that why they have a funeral or sit shiva, or is it because they're just so annoyed and disappointed that they're sitting shiva?
I
It's
think
like they don't
that's
believe-
yeah, I think it's all connected. It's this is, again, it's not just a Jewish thing. When parents get into some awful conflict with their child, and they say, you do this, you're dead to me. It's not a Jewish thing. It's unfortunately, it's a human thing. The parent-child relationship is such, a charged relationship, and sometimes it ends up exploding. So yeah, when we have those kinds of stories, which are less today, but much less today, but nevertheless historically they existed. That was part of it, right? That there was a piece of you that has died. Your future has died, right? That generation that's not here yet, that's going to be in the future, it's died. So yeah, heavy stuff.
I like that explanation better than the other explanation where you're dead to me. Sort of like a more typical, you're
Well,
dead.
yeah. All right. So we've got a couple of minutes.
Yeah, we're definitely going to finish this one today.
Yeah. When will I learn?
Yeah.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but watching a documentary on Fiddler on the Roof, I never realized this, but after Hava leaves to marry the Russian Orthodox guy, we never see Tevye speaking to God again. Like we don't hear his prayers, or he doesn't have that casual relationship with God any longer. He's so destroyed by her leaving.
Right. I mean, his whole world picture has been shattered.
Yeah.
Right? Because with yeah, and that's on the one hand, it's a wonderful entertainment piece, but it's got a very dark undertow to it. And Shalom Aleichem was like that. We did a little bit of that stuff when we did the stories, this past year, and we read some Shalom Aleichem stories. What's the price of being part of a world? We have a couple of minutes, so let's actually read that verse. Let's read page 1168, verse 28, the last verse in chapter 29.
Concealed acts concern the Lord our God, but with overt acts, it is for us and our children ever to apply all the provisions of this teaching.
Okay, so that's one translation. Does anybody have another translation? By any chance? Okay, Jen.
Wait, I'm sorry, I have to find it.
Is this Alter?
Yeah.
Chapter 29, the last verse.
Things hidden are for the Lord our God, and things revealed for us and for our children forever, to do all the words of this teaching.
Right. There's a huge difference between those two translations.
Yeah.
Okay. So, just let's read that first phrase again. What leads to, until we get to the word Lord, right? Sarita, what do you have?
It says concealed acts concern the Lord our God.
Okay. And what do you have, Jen?
Things hidden are for the Lord our God. Oh, sorry.
Okay. So what's the difference between those two kinds of translations?
Nouns versus actions, like verbs. No, like for real, we're saying just things, and it's not really specified that these are actions.
Yeah,
Whereas the
that's a
says
huge difference. The translation that we have in our JPS in the Eitz Chaim says this is all about actions. Actions
Is
that are
that-
done secretly versus actions that are done publicly.
Mhm.
When we say concealed things, things is such a vague term. What could be included in things? So things could be actions, but what else could things be?
I think the first time I ever read this, I read it in the altar version. I would just naturally, I don't think this is right, but I would naturally read it as things hidden, like almost like in a mystical sense, like things we don't know as human beings. That's for God, and that we don't necessarily have to investigate this heavily. So that's how I read it. I think like the common interpretation where this is about things we do in secret, God will still be aware of, as far as opposed to acts we do in the community, might be more the thing, but that was my first thought. It's like things that are hidden in some mystical sense, we don't go for.
So things that are in.
Friedman does interprets it differently as well.
Who?
Friedman.
Okay, what does
Kelly
he have?
Friedman.
Yeah.
The hidden things belong to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, our God, and the revealed things belong to us and to our children forever to do all the words of this instruction. And then he has a note. Moses tells the people that there are things that are solely in the divine realm, hidden from humans. Humans' task is here in this world to live a certain kind of life.
All right,
Oh,
so
hey, I agreed with Friedman, or he agreed with me. Yeah.
Yeah.
there you go. So, and this just touches, very lightly on what this might be about. Hidden things is a very vague term, which could be feelings, it could be actions, it could be propositions, it could be beings that are in another realm, it forces, or all of the above, right? So this verse in the Hebrew is very open-ended and vague. It doesn't say hidden acts. It doesn't seem ma'asim nistarim l'Hashem. It doesn't say the word acts in the Hebrew. It doesn't say the word things in the Hebrew. I mean, in Hebrew can do that. It just says the hidden ones, right, are for God. And for God, meaning God's concern, or on behalf of God, or God's business and nobody else's business. There are a zillion different kinds of ways to take that in. Therefore, the translation, if it's too reductive, it takes away the mystery. I think there is a kind of a quasi-mystical push to this verse that we can take to heart, especially as we go into the high holidays, and we know that there is so much that is hidden from us, some of which we want to uncover, and we want to make it not hidden anymore. Some things we'd like to push under the rug and keep it hidden. Or maybe there are things that we only want to share with God and keep them hidden, but give them to God. Right? So any of these things could be what applies to us at any moment. Okay, Yasher Koach. I want to wish everyone a Shana Tova U'Metuka, a sweet good year. And this is our last session together until after the holidays. Right. So our next session should be September 30th, if I'm not mistaken, after Sukkot is over. Okay, that's the next Thursday that we get together. Okay.
And Zohar is tonight at 8:30.
No, Zohar tonight is at 8. I sent out a note.
Oh,
That maybe I missed you and didn't send it out to you. I'm sorry. Because we were supposed to have a Shiva Minyan, but unfortunately that had to be canceled. So therefore
okay.
we're not postponing it. We're taking it at the right time.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. I'm glad I asked.
Okay. I'm glad you did
That's
too.
about everyone.
All right. Shana Tova.
Shana